Table 8 had been running her for 2 hours, and they were not done yet. Rosie Tran had worked the floor at Osteria Settimo for 3 years, and she knew the way servers learned to know things without being told. Exactly what kind of Table 8 was going to be from the moment they sat down. 6 people. Celebration dinner. The kind of celebration where someone was getting something they had wanted for a long time and wanted everyone in the room to know it. The woman at the center of the table wore a ring that caught the light every time she moved her hand, which was often, and she moved her hand often because the ring was the point. The men around her were the kind of men who ordered the second most expensive bottle of wine on the menu because ordering the most expensive would be showing off, and ordering the third most expensive would suggest they had a budget. And the women around her were the kind of women who laughed at things that were not funny because the woman with the ring expected laughter and they had learned to provide it. Rosie had taken their orders, brought their appetizers, refilled their water glasses twice, and absorbed 3 comments about her weight in the way she had learned to absorb such things over a lifetime of being the size she was in. Spaces that preferred her smaller, she let them land. She let them pass. She kept her face in the professional register that was neither warm nor cold, and she moved on. The comments had escalated after the second bottle of wine. "I just think," the woman with the ring said, not lowering her voice, "that certain uniforms are more flattering on certain body types. That's not a criticism. It's an observation." The man to her left laughed. The woman to her right agreed in the tone of someone agreeing with a statement they found distasteful, but not distasteful enough to push back on. Rosie refilled the water glass nearest to her and said, with the precision of someone who had been doing this for 3 years, "Can I bring you anything else right now?" "Actually," the woman with the ring said, and her voice had the particular quality of someone who had just decided to push further, "I'd love another bread basket. If you can manage the walk." The table went slightly quiet, not entirely quiet, because entirely quiet would have required the people at the table to acknowledge what had just happened, and acknowledging it would have required them to do something about it. And none of them were going to do anything about it. So the quiet was the specific partial quiet of people who had heard something cross a line and were choosing to find the tablecloth very interesting. Rosie stood still for 1 second. 1 second was the amount she allowed herself. The small interior space she had learned to build between what was said to her and how she responded to it. In that second, she thought about the number on the check that Table 8 was going to generate tonight, and she thought about the percentage that number represented, and she thought about the hospital bill that was due in 11 days, and then she assembled her face back into professional neutral and opened her mouth. The kitchen door opened. It opened from the inside, which meant it was someone who belonged in the kitchen, but the footsteps that came through it were not the footsteps of kitchen staff. Kitchen staff moved with the particular velocity of people who had 12 things to do simultaneously and were doing 11 of them. These footsteps moved at a different pace, entirely deliberate, unhurried. The footsteps of a person who was accustomed to rooms rearranging themselves around his arrival and had stopped noticing that they did. Rosie did not turn around immediately. She was still looking at Table 8, at the woman with the ring, who was watching her with the pleasant expression of someone waiting to see what a person would do when there was nothing they could do. Then she heard, from behind her and to the left, a voice she had not heard in 7 years say her name. Not her full name, just Rosie. 2 syllables, the way he had always said it, slightly flattened on the first and landing clean on the second. The specific pronunciation of someone who had said a name enough times that it had worn a groove. She turned around. Luca Marin was 34 years old and looked it in the way that men who had spent their 20s under significant pressure looked their age, not old, but settled, the softness of youth replaced by something more deliberate. He was wearing a dark jacket over a dark shirt with no tie, which was how he had always dressed when he was not required to dress otherwise, and he was standing 6 feet from her in the middle of Osteria Settimo's dining room floor with his hands in his pockets and his eyes on her face with an expression she could not immediately read because it was not an expression she had seen from him before. She said, "What are you doing here?" "I own this restaurant," he said. Behind her, she heard someone at table 8 make a small sound, the involuntary sound of a person who has just realized the social mathematics of a situation have changed in a way that is not favorable to them. Rosie looked at Luca. She had approximately 4 seconds before her professional composure did something it was not supposed to do in the middle of a dining room, and she used those 4 seconds to run a rapid inventory of everything she knew, which was, this man had not been in her life for 7 years. This man had believed a lie about her 7 years ago and had not stayed to find out whether it was true. And this man was now apparently standing in her place of employment claiming to own it, which was information that required significant processing that she did not have time to do on the floor. She said, "Since when?" 3 weeks ago. He had not moved. He was still looking at her with that expression she could not read. "I came to find you. You had 3 weeks." "I know." Something moved across his face. "I needed to have certain things in order first." Rosie became aware, with the specific awareness of someone who worked the floor and always knew where the tables were, that the dining room had gone to the particular quiet of a room full of people who have stopped pretending to have other conversations. She became aware that at table 8, the woman with the ring had gone very still, which was a change from the constant movement of the ring hand, and therefore noticeable. She looked at Luca, and she looked at the dining room, and she made a calculation. Then Luca crossed the 6 feet between them, and he put one hand on her face, and he kissed her in the middle of Osteria Settimo with half of River North watching. Not the brief ceremonial kiss of a performance, but the kind of kiss that had 7 years of unfinished business behind it, the kind that did not particularly care who was in the room. When it ended, Rosie became aware that her hand had found his jacket at some point during it. She released the fabric carefully. The dining room was entirely silent. Luca did not look at the room. He looked at her. "Are you all right?" he said, which was such a specific and unexpected question in the specific context of everything that had just happened, that she almost said no, which would have been the truth. Before she caught herself. "I'm working," she said. "I know." He glanced. Once. At table 8. Something in his expression changed in a way that was small and specific and had nothing of performance in it. He reached inside his jacket and removed a plain white envelope, and he walked to table 8, and he set the envelope on the table in front of the woman with the ring. "Cara," he said, and his voice was entirely level. "You should read that tonight." The woman called Cara did not look at the envelope. She looked at Luca, and then she looked at Rosie, and the expression on her face was not the pleasant expression from before. It was something older and more complicated, the expression of someone who has just watched a clock they thought had stopped begin to move again. Luca came back to where Rosie was standing. "I'll be in the back," he said. "When you're ready." Then he went through the kitchen door, and the dining room remained entirely silent for another 3 seconds, and then the noise of a restaurant resumed. And Rosie stood in the middle of the floor with her order pad in her hand, and her heart doing something irregular, and table 8 in her peripheral vision, and the particular feeling of a person who has just had 7 years of carefully organized interior architecture rearranged without being consulted. She took a breath. She turned to table 8. The woman called Cara was looking at the envelope on the table in front of her and not picking it up. The man to her left was looking at the woman called Cara. The woman to her right was looking at the tablecloth. "Can I bring you anything else?" Rosie said, in the voice she used when she needed her voice to be a wall. Nobody at table 8 said anything about her wait for the rest of the evening. Table 8 paid their check at 10:40, which was earlier than Rosie had expected, and left a tip that was exactly 15%, which told her everything she needed to know about how the evening had landed for them. Cara Whitfield walked out without looking back. The envelope went with her, inside her clutch, slipped in during a moment when the rest of the table was gathering coats, and saying the things people said at the end of celebratory dinners that had not ended the way they planned. Rosie watched from the service station and noted the envelope's departure and filed it alongside everything else from the last 40 minutes that she had not yet had time to process. She finished her closing tasks. She wiped down her section. She rolled the remaining silverware. She did all of it with the focused efficiency of someone who needed her hands to be doing something concrete while her mind was doing something she did not yet have words for. And when the last table in her section was cleared and her side work was done and the floor manager had signed off on her checkout, she stood at the server station for a moment with her apron folded over her arm and looked at the kitchen door. It was possible he had left. 3 weeks of owning a restaurant and not saying anything. Then 1 evening of a kiss in the middle of the dining room and an envelope left on a table. And then gone. That would be consistent with the version of Luca Marin she had constructed over 7 years of not hearing from him. The version that was not entirely fair and not entirely unfair, and was the version she had needed in order to keep moving. She pushed the kitchen door open. He was at the prep counter with a cup of coffee, which the night kitchen staff had clearly provided because the cup was from the staff service, not the dining room. And he was reading something on his phone with the focused expression of a man who worked, even when he was waiting. He looked up when she came in. He put the phone face down on the counter. She said, "How long have you known I worked here?" "Since before I bought the restaurant." He watched her face. "I found out you were here. And then I looked more carefully at the property. And then I made an offer. You bought a restaurant because I work here. I bought a restaurant that happened to have you in it because it was also a good acquisition." A pause. Both things are true. Rosie set her apron on the counter and looked at him across the stainless steel prep surface, which was approximately 4 feet of distance and 7 years of everything else. "You had 3 weeks," she said again. "You walked in tonight. I needed to be ready." He said it without deflection, which was not what she had prepared for. She had prepared for a version of this conversation that included more maneuvering. "There were things I had to know before I could stand in front of you. I didn't want to come here with the same amount of information I had 7 years ago." The kitchen was quiet around them. The night crew had finished their breakdown and gone, and the building had settled into the particular stillness of a restaurant after service. The smell of garlic and cleaned surfaces and the low hum of the walk-in cooler running in the back. "What did you find out?" she said. He looked at her steadily. "Everything, but I want to tell you about it properly. Not tonight. Not standing in the kitchen at 11 at night when you've been on your feet for 8 hours. He picked up the coffee cup and set it down again. "Will you sit down?" She sat down on one of the prep stools. She did not know exactly why she sat down. Possibly because she had been on her feet for 8 hours. Possibly because there was something in the way he said it that was not a performance of reasonableness but actual reasonableness. And she had not had a significant amount of actual reasonableness directed at her recently, and her body had responded before her mind could weigh in. He poured her a cup of coffee from the staff carafe. She did not say thank you, and he did not appear to expect it. She had been 21 the last time she saw him. They had been together for a year and 2 months, which in the accounting of her life at the time had felt like something substantial, the kind of relationship that changed the texture of ordinary days. He had been 27, already working inside the edges of his family's business. She had been finishing her 2nd year of culinary school on a hospitality scholarship that was the first significant thing she had earned entirely on her own. Then she had been accused of stealing from the restaurant where she worked part-time. $240 from the register over 3 shifts. The manager had shown her the inventory discrepancy and the shift records and the camera footage of her near the register during the relevant times, which proved proximity but not action. And she had said she had not taken anything. And by the end of the week she had lost the job and the scholarship board had opened a review, and by the end of the month she had lost the scholarship. Luca's family had pulled him out of contact within 10 days. She had told herself he would call when he had separated himself enough from them to make his own decision. He had not called. She had waited 3 weeks and then stopped waiting because stopping was the only thing she could do with the space where waiting had been. She had not finished culinary school. She had taken the first service job she could find, and then a better one, and then this one. And she had built a life that was functional, and sometimes more than functional, and she did not think about the scholarship, or the accusation, or Luca Marin on most days. On the days she did, she thought about the specific quality of being told you had done something you had not done, and having no mechanism to prove otherwise. "Cara Whitfield," she said. Luca looked at her. "She and I worked the same floor 7 years ago, at the place where I was accused." Rosie looked at her coffee. The memory was assembling itself in the specific way that memories assembled when you had kept them in a particular compartment, and then opened the compartment not all at once, but in pieces, each one clicking into place. "She applied for the same scholarship I got. I didn't know that until later. After," she looked up. "I never made the connection. I didn't know her well enough to think about her after I left." Luca was very still across the prep counter. "Is that what's in the envelope?" she said. "Part of it." "How did you find it?" "I have people who are good at finding things." He said it plainly, without the particular emphasis. Some men put on statements like that to make sure the listener understood what kind of people he meant. She understood anyway. She had understood. At 21. What kind of family she had gotten involved with, and she had made a decision to be involved anyway, because she had been 21, and he had been a specific kind of person, that made a specific kind of sense to her at the time. "I knew something was wrong with what happened to you. I knew it 7 years ago and I didn't do anything about it, which is a different conversation. When I found out you were here, I started looking again. It took 3 weeks to get everything I needed." Rosie sat with this. She sat with the information that the accusation that had dismantled her life at 21 had been investigated, 7 years later, by the man who had not stayed to investigate it at the time, and that the investigation had produced something concrete enough to put in an envelope and set in front of Cara Whitfield at her engagement dinner. She felt something that was not exactly anger, and not exactly grief, and not exactly relief, but occupied the same territory as all three of them. "I'm going to need time to think about this," she said. "I know. Not tonight. I know." He had not pushed once during the entire conversation, which she noticed because she had been waiting for the push, the place where the reasonableness revealed itself to be strategy. It had not appeared. "Go home. Sleep. I'll be here tomorrow." She stood and picked up her apron and her bag. She looked at him across the prep counter one more time. This man, who was 34 and not 27, who was standing in a kitchen he apparently owned, who had come in through the back door of her life with an envelope full of things she had spent 7 years not knowing. "Why tonight?" she said. "Of all the nights in 3 weeks, why tonight?" He looked at her for a moment. "Because I walked past the dining room window at 8:30 and I saw what was happening at table 8. Something moved in his face that was not performance, and I wasn't going to stand outside and watch that." Rosie looked at him for a long moment. Then she walked out of the kitchen and through the empty dining room and out the front door into the October night. And she stood on the sidewalk for a moment with the cold air on her face. She thought about a woman named Cara Whitfield who had applied for a scholarship and not gotten it, and had decided, at whatever age she had been then, that the person who got it instead should not be allowed to keep it. She thought about $240 and a year of culinary school she had not finished, and a man who had not called. Then she pulled her coat closed and started walking toward the train. And she did not let herself think about the way he had said her name until she was 3 blocks away, and there was enough distance that it felt safe to let it in for just a moment. It did not go back as easily as it used to. She came back the next evening, 20 minutes before her shift started, which was earlier than she needed to be there, and both of them knew it. Luca was in the small office off the back corridor, the one that had belonged to the previous owner and still had his framed wine certifications on the wall, working through what appeared to be a stack of supplier contracts. He looked up when she appeared in the doorway and did not look surprised. which told her he had been expecting her earlier rather than later and had made a calculation that had turned out to be correct, which was mildly irritating. She sat down in the chair across from the desk without being invited. "Tell me what's in the envelope," she said. He closed the folder in front of him. Cara Whitfield's roommate at the time was a woman named Devon Park. Devon is currently in Portland, runs a catering company, has no connection to anyone in this situation anymore. He folded his hands on the desk. Devon told one of my people that on the night before the inventory discrepancy was reported, Cara asked her how much money would be convincing, but not so much that it looked staged. Rosie was very still. Devon didn't know what Cara was planning. She thought it was for a story Cara was writing, she said, which she acknowledged was not a thing she actually believed at the time, but was the explanation that required the least from her. He looked at Rosie steadily. Devon also confirmed that Cara had been passed over for the scholarship 2 weeks before the accusation was filed, and that Cara had spent those 2 weeks talking about you specifically. Talking about me, how? The way people talk about someone they have decided is the cause of something that was done to them. He paused. Devon said Cara referred to you as the girl who took her spot. Not your name. That phrase. Specifically, Rosie looked at the wine certifications on the wall behind him. She looked at them for a long moment. Not because they were interesting, but because she needed to look at something that was not his face while she processed the information that the architecture of 7 years of her life had been built on a deliberate act performed by a woman who had called her the girl who took her spot. "There's more," he said. "Tell me." The register footage. The original footage was reviewed by the scholarship board and the restaurant's insurance company, and both concluded it showed you near the register during the relevant shifts. My people pulled the original file from the restaurant's archived system, which the current owner kept in storage without knowing what it was. The footage shows you near the register. It also shows, on the shift before the first reported discrepancy, Cara near the same register for 4 minutes while you were on your break. He waited. The 4 minutes are not visible in the version that was submitted to the scholarship board. There are 9 seconds missing. Rosie put both hands flat on the desk in front of her. She did not say anything. 9 seconds is enough time to open a register with a key, remove cash, and close it. The restaurant used a manual key system at the time, not a code, and Cara had access to the key cabinet as a shift lead. He said all of this in the same level voice he had used for all of it, not softening it and not performing gravity, simply telling her the shape of what had been done to her. The envelope contains Devon's signed statement, the original footage with a timecode analysis, and a letter from a media attorney outlining the defamation liability Cara Whitfield would face if this became public. Rosie sat with all of it. She sat with it the way she had learned to sit with large things, not trying to hold all of it at once, but letting it settle piece by piece into the space it was going to occupy going forward. "What does she have to do?" Rosie said. "That's your decision." He looked at her. "It was done to you. What happens next is yours." She looked at him. This was the second time in 2 days that he had said something she had not expected, and she was running out of the version of him she had prepared for, which had not included a man who handed things over without conditions. "I'll think about it," she said. "All right." She stood. She had 20 minutes before her shift, and she had come here to get the information, and she had the information, and there was nothing left to do in this room that she could not also do on the floor with her section set up and her tables ready. She picked up her bag. "Rosie." She stopped at the doorway. "I'm not going to keep bringing it up," he said. "Whatever you decide to do with it, that's yours. I'm not going to be here every day asking about it." A pause. "I wanted you to know that." She looked at him in the doorway for a moment. "Why did you stay away?" she said. 7 years. Why didn't you look into it then?" He was quiet for a moment. Not the quiet of someone forming a lie, but the quiet of someone deciding how honest to be with themselves in front of another person, which was a different kind of quiet. "My family told me the evidence was clear and that getting involved would make things worse for everyone, including you. I believed them because it was easier to believe them than to do the thing that was harder. He looked at his hands on the desk. I was 27, and I thought I understood how things worked, and I didn't, and I left you without the thing you most needed from me, which was for someone to say the accusation was wrong before any evidence said so. He looked up. I'm not asking you to forgive that. I'm telling you I know what it was. Rosie stood in the doorway with that. She stood with the specific weight of a person who has waited 7 years to hear something said plainly and is now hearing it and discovering that it lands differently than she had imagined it would. Not lighter and not heavier, but stranger. More textured, more real than the version she had rehearsed receiving. I have a shift, she said. I know. She went out to the floor. It was a Thursday, which was a medium night at Osteria Settimo. Busy enough to require full attention but not so relentless that there was no space between tables to think. Rosie worked her section with the competence of 3 years on the same floor, and she did not think about Devon Park, or 9 seconds of missing footage, or the phrase "the girl who took her spot," because there was no room for it on the floor, and the floor had always been where the things she could not hold elsewhere did not follow her. Luca came through the dining room once, at around 8. The way a restaurant owner came through when learning the rhythms of a new property, observing without interfering. He did not stop at her section. He did not look at her in a way that was different from the way he looked at anything else in the room. He went back through the kitchen door and did not reappear. She noticed all of this with the peripheral attention of someone who had always known where the tables were, and she filed it in the same place she filed the other things she had noticed about him in the past. 2 days. Which was a place she had not used in 7 years and was apparently still functional. At 10:15, when her last table of the evening had paid and she was doing her closing work, he came out of the back corridor with his jacket and his keys and stopped near the service station. I'm heading out, he said. It was not an invitation. It was simply information offered to the room, the way someone said it when they were used to being in a space with other people and had not yet recalibrated, to being in a space with one specific person. Okay, she said. He started toward the door. He stopped. He turned back, and the expression on his face was the one she had not been able to read on the night before, and she could read it now, which was that it was the expression of a man who had spent 3 weeks preparing for a conversation and had now had it and was standing in the aftermath of it, without a plan for what came after the preparation. I don't know how to do this part, he said. I know how to find things, and I know how to fix things, and I know how to stand in a room and not flinch. I don't know how to stand in front of you and ask for something without it sounding like I think I've earned it, because I haven't earned it. Rosie looked at him across the service station with the last of her closing work in her hands. I'm not asking you for anything tonight, he said. I'm telling you I would like to, and that I understand if the answer is no. And I understand if the answer is not yet. And I understand if the answer is that you need me to be your employer and nothing else. And I will do whichever of those things you tell me to do. He looked at her steadily, but I wanted to say it plainly, because I did not say things plainly 7 years ago, and I'm trying to do it differently now. The restaurant was quiet around them. The kitchen crew was doing their breakdown. The floor manager was in the back office. It was just the 2 of them and the low light of a dining room after service, and 7 years of things that had been said the wrong way or not said at all. Come back tomorrow, she said, and the day after that, and we'll see. He looked at her for a moment. He nodded once. Then he went out the front door, and she heard his car start outside, and she stood at the service station for a moment before going back to her closing work. And she did not examine too carefully what it meant that she had said come back, because examining it would require her to explain it to herself, and she was not ready to do that yet. She finished her work. She turned off the last of the lights. She locked the front door and stood on the sidewalk in the October dark, and the city moved around her the way it always did, indifferent and bright, and entirely without opinion about the things she was carrying. She took the train home. She thought not about 9 seconds of missing footage, but about the phrase he had used. I know what it was. Not I'm sorry. Not I was wrong. I know what it was, which was more specific than sorry and harder to say, and landed. She found, in a different place entirely. She made tea. She sat at her kitchen table until it went cold. Then she went to bed and slept better than she had in 3 weeks, which she noted without trying to explain. Osteria Settimo did not open until 11:30 on weekdays, which meant that at 9:45 on a Friday morning, the dining room was empty and the front door was locked. Rosie was not scheduled until 4. She was at home when her phone lit up with a text from a number she did not recognize. You should know that Kara Whitfield is at your restaurant right now asking for Luca. Thought you'd want to be there. She looked at the text for a long moment. She had 3 guesses about who had sent it, and the most likely was Devon Park, who had apparently decided that a signed statement was not the extent of what she owed the situation. Rosie put her phone in her jacket pocket and left her apartment. She got to Osteria Settimo at 10:20 and came in through the service entrance using the staff code Luca had given her the day before for no stated reason. She could hear voices from the direction of the corridor office, Luca's, low and even, and Kara's, with the particular pitch of someone who had come in prepared and was discovering the room was not configured the way they had expected. Rosie went to the kitchen, which shared a wall with the corridor, and stood near the pass-through where the wall was thinnest, and listened. You made a mistake, Kara said, coming to that dinner, doing what you did. I set an envelope on a table. Luca's voice was the same voice he used for everything, which was not loud and not quiet, but occupied a register that made the air around it pay attention. That's a fairly small action. You know what was in that envelope? I do. Then you know this is not something you want to escalate. A pause, and Rosie could hear in that pause the particular quality of a person recalibrating, moving from the approach they had planned to a secondary approach. Marcus's company has a significant relationship with the Marin Group. $43 million of active contracts. I assume you're aware of that. Marcus is your fiancé. Yes. And you're here to tell me that if I move forward with what's in the envelope, those contracts are at risk. Another pause. Shorter. I'm here to have a conversation. You're here to negotiate, Luca said, with no particular emphasis on the word, simply naming it, which tells me you've read the contents of the envelope and you understand what they mean. Which tells me Devon spoke to you. A brief silence. What did she say? That's not relevant. It is. Actually, because if Devon called you before you came here, then Devon has made her own decision about what side of this she's on. And that changes the weight of her statement considerably. His voice was still entirely level. Kara, the footage exists. The statement exists. The timecode analysis exists. The only question is what you'd like to do about that. What I'd like, Kara said, and her voice had shifted into something harder and less controlled. The specific vocal quality of a person who came in with a strategy and is watching it not work is for you to understand that there are consequences to what you're doing that extend beyond you and Rosie Tran. There are real people involved. Rosie Tran is a real person. The silence that followed was 6 or 7 seconds, which was long enough to change the temperature of a room. She got the scholarship, Kara said, and her voice was different now, lower, stripped of the negotiating register, and what was underneath it was something that had been there for a long time and had not been looked at directly in a long time. I had a 3.9 average. I had 2 externship references. I had done everything they asked, and I did it better than anyone else in that cohort, and they gave it to her because she needed it more, which is not how merit is supposed to work. A pause that was not strategic but involuntary. The pause of someone who has said the thing they have been carrying. I know that doesn't justify what I did. I'm not standing here telling you it does. I'm telling you it was not nothing. What was done to me was not nothing. The kitchen was very quiet. Rosie stood at the pass-through with both hands pressed flat against the wall and listened to a woman she had spent 7 years not thinking about describe the version of events that had lived inside, the thing that had been done to her. "What was done to you," Luca said, "was that you did not receive a scholarship. What you did was destroy someone's career and take 7 years of her life." He was quiet for a moment. "Those are not equivalent." "I know that." "Then you understand why I'm not going to be negotiated out of this by a contracts number." A long silence. When Kara spoke again, her voice was different from all the previous versions of it, stripped of strategy and of grievance, and of the hard register of the negotiating room. And what was left was something smaller and more human, and considerably more difficult to listen to. "What do you want?" she said. "What does she want?" "That's not my answer to give." "Then whose is it?" "Hers." The silence stretched. Rosie heard footsteps, Kara's, moving toward the office door, and she stepped back from the pass-through and went to the far end of the kitchen counter and picked up a towel and was doing nothing with it. When Kara Whitfield walked through the kitchen door, they looked at each other. Kara Whitfield was 31 years old and looked like someone who had spent a decade maintaining the appearance of a person who had everything managed. She was dressed for a professional meeting, and none of it was doing what it was supposed to do at 10:20 in the morning in a restaurant kitchen, standing in front of the woman she had spent 7 years not looking at directly. "You were listening," Kara said. "Yes." Kara looked at the kitchen around her, at the prep surfaces and the equipment in the place where Rosie was standing, and something moved across her face that was not the expression she had come in with. "I'm not going to say I'm sorry," she said. "I don't think I'm entitled to ask you to hear that from me." "You're not," Rosie said. "I know." Kara looked at her directly, which appeared to cost her something. "I know what I did. I've known what I did for 7 years. I've also spent 7 years telling myself a version of it that was more survivable than the actual version. And then that envelope showed up on my table 2 nights ago, and the actual version is the only one that's available now." She stopped. "I don't have anything to offer you. I don't know what you want from me, and I don't have the standing to ask." Rosie looked at her. She looked at her the way she had looked at things in the kitchen that she had not yet decided what to do with, carefully and without premature conclusion. "The scholarship board," Rosie said. "I want a letter. Not to them, I don't want the scholarship. I want a letter to the culinary program director, on record, stating that the information provided to the board at the time of the review was fabricated. I want it in writing, signed, notarized, in their files." She held Kara's gaze. "That's all." Kara was quiet for a moment. "That's it. That's it. Not the footage, not Devon's statement, not the attorney. If you provide the letter..." "No, those stay where they are." Rosie set the towel on the counter. "If you don't provide the letter within 30 days, I will decide what to do with what's in the envelope. And I'll make that decision without consulting you." Kara looked at her for a long moment, and what was in her face was not the expression of someone who had won or lost a negotiation, but the expression of someone who has been seen accurately for the first time in a situation they had managed for 7 years, to not be seen inaccurately. It was not comfortable. It did not appear to be meant to be comfortable. 30 days, Kara said. 30 days. Kara picked up her bag from where she had set it on the prep counter. She looked at Rosie once more, and the look was not an apology and was not a closing, just an acknowledgement. The specific acknowledgement of one person to another that something real had passed between them, and both of them knew what it was. Then she walked out the service entrance, and her footsteps crossed the alley outside, and the door swung closed behind her. Luca appeared in the kitchen doorway. Rosie looked at him. "I heard everything," she said. "I know. I saw you come in." She took that in. He had known she was there and had conducted the conversation the same way regardless, which told her something. "You didn't tell her I was listening." "No." She looked at the service door where Kara had gone out. She thought about a letter in a culinary program director's file, on record, signed and notarized, stating that the information provided at the time of the review was fabricated. She thought about what it would have meant to have that letter 7 years ago, and what it meant to have the possibility of it now, which were different things, but not entirely unrelated things. "It's not enough," she said. "I know that. A letter doesn't give back what it took." "No," Lucas said, "it doesn't. But it's something that can actually exist in the world." She picked up the towel again and set it down again. "I don't want to spend more of my life on Kara Whitfield than she's already had." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "That's the clearest thing I've heard anyone say in a long time." Rosie looked at him across the kitchen. She looked at the man who had come in through the back door of her life 3 days ago with an envelope and a kiss and 7 years of information she had not had. And she thought about come back tomorrow and the day after that, and we'll see. And she thought that tomorrow had arrived, and the day after that was beginning, and the we'll see was no longer entirely hypothetical. "I have a shift at 4, she said. "I know. I'm going to go home and come back at 4. "All right." She picked up her bag. She walked toward the service entrance. She stopped with her hand on the door and looked back at him, which she had not entirely planned to do. "Luca." He looked at her. "I know what it was too," she said. "What you did 7 years ago. I know what it was." She held his gaze for a moment. "I'm not telling you that it's gone. I'm telling you I know what it was, and I can work with that." He looked at her with the expression that she could now read, that she had learned to read in 3 days of watching him be a specific kind of person she had not fully expected. And he did not say anything, which was correct, because there was nothing to say that would improve on what she had just said. She went out through the service entrance into the alley and walked toward the street, and the October air was cold and clean. And somewhere behind her, Luca was standing in a kitchen with wine certifications on the wall that did not belong to him yet. And she walked toward the train with something in her chest that she had not carried in a long time and was not yet ready to name, but was not, she thought, going to go back where it had been. The letter from the culinary program director arrived on a Tuesday, 3 weeks and 4 days after Kara Whitfield walked out of Osteria Settimo's service entrance. Rosie was in her apartment when it came, forwarded from an address she had not lived at for 5 years. She opened it at the kitchen table with her morning coffee going cold beside her and read it twice, then put it down and looked at the November sky outside, flat and grey and indifferent. The letter stated that the scholarship board had received new information regarding the review conducted 7 years prior, that upon examination of this information, the board had determined the original review had been based on fabricated evidence, and that the record had been corrected accordingly. It was signed by the director and countersigned by the board chair. It contained no apology, which was accurate because the program was not the party that owed one. She had known it was coming. Kara had sent it through an attorney. Certified. 17 days into the 30-day window, and she had still needed to sit with it when it arrived. Because knowing a thing was coming and having it arrive were different experiences. After a while, she took a photograph of the letter and sent it to one person, which was not Luca. It was her former culinary school advisor, a woman named Professor Adeyemi, who had written Rosie a reference for the scholarship and had, in the weeks after the accusation, sent her 2 emails that Rosie had not answered because there had been nothing she could say that was not, "I didn't do it," and she had already said that, and it had not mattered. Professor Adeyemi responded, "In 11 minutes, I always knew. I'm so glad this came. Are you still cooking?" Rosie looked at the question for a moment. Then she typed, "I'm going to start again," and sent it before she could revise it into something more qualified. She picked up the letter and put it in the folder where she kept documents that mattered, and then she put on her jacket and went to Osteria Settimo, which was where she went now when she had something to think about that was too large for her apartment. It was a Tuesday afternoon, which meant the restaurant was in its quiet pre-service configuration tables set, kitchen running prep, the floor empty and lit with the particular amber light that made the space look like something from a different century. Luca was at the bar going through wine inventory with the sommelier, a precise older man named Gianni, who treated every bottle like it had feelings and who had taken, over the past 3 weeks, to leaving Rosie small samples of things he thought she should try, accompanied by handwritten notes in Italian that she was slowly learning to read. She sat down at the far end of the bar. Luca looked up, finished the note he was making, said something to Gianni, and came to where she was sitting. She slid the photograph of the letter across the bar. He looked at it. He read it. He put his phone face down on the bar and looked at her. Cara sent it through an attorney. Rosie said, 17 days in. I know. My attorney told me. He looked at her. How are you? It was a question he asked the way he did most things, directly and without decoration, and she had learned in 3 weeks that it was not a social question, but an actual one, which still occasionally caught her off guard. I sent Professor Adeyemi a message, she said. My culinary advisor. She wrote my scholarship reference. I told her I was going to start cooking again. Something moved across his face that was not surprise, because he had apparently been waiting for this in the specific way that people waited for things they believed were going to happen but were not going to rush. What does that mean for you? I don't know yet. She looked at the bar, at the wood grain under the amber light. I've been doing service for 7 years, and I'm good at it, and I don't hate it. But I went to culinary school because I wanted to cook, and I stopped going because I lost the scholarship. And I've been telling myself for 7 years that the two things were not related. She paused. They were related. What do you want to do about it? I want to think about it. She looked at him. I'm not asking you for anything. I'm telling you what I'm thinking about because I'm here and you're here, and we've been talking for 3 weeks and it's the thing I'm thinking about. He looked at her for a moment. Can I say something? Yes. This kitchen has a sous chef position that's been open since I bought the property. The previous sous left with the previous owner, which is a common thing, and I'm not going to pretend it wasn't an inconvenience. But the position is open. He picked up his phone and put it in his pocket. I'm not offering it to you. You have a floor position, and I'm not going to make your employment contingent on taking a different one. I'm telling you it exists, and that if you wanted to talk to Gianni and the head chef about the direction we're taking the kitchen, I think that would be a useful conversation for everyone. He paused. That's all. Rosie looked at him. She thought about what it would mean to go back into a kitchen as something other than a server, to pick up the things she had put down at 21 and find out what 7 years had done to her relationship with it. She thought about whether she was ready and concluded that ready was probably not the right frame, that the right frame was more like willing, and that she was willing. I'll talk to them, she said. Not today. This week. All right. She picked up her photograph and put it back in her jacket pocket. She sat at the bar for a moment with the amber light and the quiet of the pre-service restaurant around her and the particular feeling of a person who has just said yes to something in the form of saying, I'll think about it, which was the only form she was currently able to say yes in, and which he appeared to understand without her explaining it. They had dinner together for the first time that evening, after service, at the bar, which was the only place in the restaurant where they could sit side by side rather than across from each other, and which mattered more than she had expected it to. Gianni left them a bottle of something he refused to name, accompanied by a note in Italian that Rosie managed to translate as approximately, "Stop working so hard and eat something." They talked for 2 hours, not about Cara, and not about the scholarship, and not about 7 years ago, but about things that were present tense, the direction Luca wanted to take the kitchen, which was more restrained than the previous owner's vision and focused on the specific regional traditions of the Ligurian coast where his grandmother had cooked. Rosie talked about what she had learned in 7 years of service about what people actually wanted from a meal versus what they said they wanted, which was different information and useful to someone redesigning a menu. She talked about the flavors she had been thinking about for years, the combinations she had assembled in her head during the 7 years she had not been in a kitchen, the dishes that existed nowhere except in the specific overlap of memory and imagination. Luca listened with full attention and without interrupting except to ask questions that were genuinely curious. She noticed that he ate the way she did, deliberately and with actual interest in what was in front of him, which was not a universal quality and was, she found, a meaningful one. At midnight, Gianni came back through and looked at the mostly empty bottle and the two of them at the bar and said something in Italian that made Luca produce a short sound that was the closest thing to a laugh she had heard from him in the time she had known him. She asked what Gianni had said. Luca told her it was untranslatable. Gianni, from the doorway, said in accented English that it was entirely translatable and that the translation was finally. Rosie looked at Luca. He looked at her. He's been saying that since the second week, Luca said. Since before I knew who you were, Gianni confirmed from the doorway. And then he went back through to the kitchen with the specific satisfaction of a man whose opinions have been vindicated. She looked at the bar in front of her. She looked at the remaining wine in her glass. She thought about the specific distance between where she was sitting and where he was sitting, which was approximately 8 inches, and about the fact that the last time he had closed that distance, he had done it in the middle of a dining room full of people, which had been a very specific kind of statement, and about whether the thing that happened next should be different from that or the same. She decided it should be different, quieter, hers to initiate, which was also different. She leaned across the 8 inches and kissed him, not in the middle of a dining room but at the bar of a closed restaurant at midnight with a mostly empty bottle of something nameless between them and an Italian sommelier, audibly not listening from the kitchen. And it was quieter than the dining room version and longer, and did not have an audience, and was, she found, considerably more satisfying for all of those reasons. When it ended, he looked at her with an expression that was not the unreadable one from the first night, or the careful one from the kitchen conversations, but something she had not seen from him before. Open in a way that suggested the careful maintenance of a very controlled person had briefly, voluntarily, been set aside. Took you long enough, she said, which was not entirely fair given that she was the one who had just initiated it, but felt accurate in the larger sense. I was waiting, he said. I know. She picked up her glass. You're good at that. 7 years of practice. She looked at him for a moment. There was a version of that statement that was complicated and a version that was simple, and she chose, deliberately, and as an act of decision rather than avoidance, to receive the simple version tonight. Tomorrow there would be time for the complicated version. Tonight there was the bar and the amber light and the mostly empty bottle and the 8 inches of distance that were no longer quite the same 8 inches they had been an hour ago. I'll see you Thursday, she said, for the kitchen meeting. Thursday, he said. She put on her jacket and picked up her bag and went out the front door this time, not the service entrance, and she stood on the sidewalk and let the November air do what November air did. Cold and unambiguous and entirely without opinion. And she thought about finally, which was what Gianni had said, and she thought that finally was probably right. And she walked to the train with the particular feeling of a person who has put something down for a long time and has just picked it back up and found that it fits differently than it used to, but fits. They got engaged on a Wednesday, which was not a day either of them had planned for. It happened in the kitchen of Osteria Settimo at 2 in the afternoon, between the lunch service and the dinner prep, when the restaurant was in the specific quiet that existed between those two states, and the kitchen smelled of the morning's stock and the afternoon's mise en place, and Sal had gone to his cousin's birthday, and Gianni was doing a supplier tasting in the back, and it was just Rosie and Luca at the prep counter with a notebook between them and a problem they had been circling for 3 days. The problem was the dish. Not a cooking problem, the dish itself was finished. Had been on the menu for 6 weeks. Had become, in Gianni's considered opinion, the reason certain tables were booking 3 weeks in advance. The problem was the name. Rosie had been calling it by its working title in the kitchen, which was simply the dumpling pasta, and the menu currently listed it under a description that was accurate but long, and Luca wanted a name for it. A real name. The kind that could live on a menu for years. They had been going through options for 3 days, and nothing had been right. It should be named after someone, Luca said. It's not that kind of dish. It's exactly that kind of dish. It's two things that became one thing. That's always named after someone. Rosie looked at the notebook. She thought about her mother's kitchen in Pilsen, the specific fold of the dumplings that she had translated into pasta, the way her mother's hands had moved. And she thought about the Ligurian coast she had never visited but had cooked from for 8 months. And she thought about the particular overlap of those two things that had produced something neither of them was alone. Castillo, she said. Not a question. He looked at her. Your father's name. My mother's name, too. Before she married, she looked at the notebook. Castillo pasta. It's simple. It's right, he said. She looked at him across the prep counter in the 2 o'clock quiet of a kitchen that had become, in 8 months, the place she thought of first when she thought of where she wanted to be. And she thought about that for a moment, about what it meant to have a place like that, and about the person who had made it possible to have a place like that. And something in her face must have done something, because he looked at her with the expression she knew now, the open one, the one he only produced voluntarily and never for anyone else's benefit. Marry me, he said. Not a question either. She looked at him for a long moment. We've been together 8 months. I know. That's not very long. I know that too. He did not look away. I'm not asking you to decide right now. I'm telling you what I want, because I told you I was going to say things plainly. Rosie looked at the notebook with Castillo written at the top of the page. She thought about plainly, which was the word he had been using since the beginning, and which had turned out to mean exactly what it said. She thought about 8 months of Thursday kitchen meetings and closing time bar conversations, and the particular quality of standing next to someone in a kitchen while both of them were paying full attention to 2 different things, and the room still feeling like enough. Yes, she said. Also, not a question. The planning happened the way most things happened between them, which was practically and without excessive ceremony about the process itself, all the ceremony being reserved for the thing itself. They were not people who needed the planning to be an event. They were people who needed the result to be real, and they worked toward that with the same focused efficiency they brought to everything else. Rosie's list was kept in the same notebook as the menu development notes, which Luca found on a Tuesday morning and read without comment before sliding it back across the counter toward her. She had written small, outside if possible. Food has to be ours. No DJ. Gianni picks the wine. Lucia gives a reading if she's well enough. Lucia was well enough. The treatment had concluded 6 weeks prior, and she was 23 and thin, and had her mother's eyes, and had met Luca twice, and had told Rosie after the 2nd time that she approved, which she delivered with the specific gravity of a 23-year-old who understood that her opinion was being sought and was going to provide it thoroughly. They found a venue in the 3rd week of looking a small property in the North Shore, a house with a garden that could hold 40 people if the weather held, which in early June in Chicago was a conditional proposition everyone involved chose to accept. The owner of the property was a retired restaurateur who had known Gianni for 30 years and who gave them the space at a rate that Gianni described as a wedding gift, and Rosie suspected was simply Gianni operating in the specific economy of favors that governed his entire social existence. Sal agreed to cook. This was not a small thing. Sal did not cook outside his own kitchen for anyone. When Rosie asked him, he had looked at her for a long moment and then said, in the accented English he used when he wanted to be certain he was understood, "For you, I cook. For him, I cook, because he learned correctly and does not argue with me about salt." This was, Rosie had come to understand, the highest form of endorsement available in Sal's register. The menu took 2 evenings to agree on and was the most enjoyable argument they had ever had. Luca wanted the branzino, which he had been refining since the night he made it for her in February, and which had reached, in his estimation, a state of correctness he was satisfied with. Rosie wanted the Castillo pasta. Sal, consulted by phone at 10 at night, said they should serve both and stop calling him at 10 at night, and then provided an unsolicited opinion on the dessert that was, when they followed it. Correct. They went to the registry office on a Friday morning in April to file the paperwork, which was a small room and a form, and a clerk who asked their names without looking up and wrote them down and told them their appointment for the ceremony was confirmed for the 14th of June. Outside on the sidewalk afterward, Rosie looked at the street and the ordinary Friday morning moving around them and felt something that was not what she had expected to feel, which was bigger and simpler and quieter than she had prepared for. "That's it," she said. "That's the paperwork part." Luca looked at her. "The rest is in June." "I know." She looked at the street. "I just expected the paperwork part to feel like less." He looked at her for a moment, and then he did something she had not seen him do before outside of a kitchen, which was smile without any reservation in it. And she thought that after 10 months she was still occasionally surprised by his face doing something new, which seemed like a good sign for June and beyond. They went back to the restaurant. There was a lunch service to prepare for. The Castillo pasta was on special that day, which it was every Wednesday, and there were 42 covers on the book. And Sal was already in the kitchen producing sounds that indicated the morning delivery had been acceptable but not exceptional, and the ordinary ongoing life of Osteria Settimo received them back without ceremony, because it did not know that anything had changed, and in most ways, nothing had. In the ways that mattered, everything had. Across the street from the registry office, a car that had not been there when they went in was parked at the curb when they came out. The woman inside watched Rosie Tran and Luca Marin stand on the sidewalk for a moment, watched whatever passed between them on the street, watched them walk back in the direction of River North together. She watched until they were gone. Cara Whitfield had not planned to be here. She had been 3 blocks away on unrelated business, had turned a corner, and had seen them going into the building, and had stopped without deciding to stop, and had waited without deciding to wait, and had watched them come out. Her phone was in her hand. The contact the man who found things was still in her phone. It had been there since November. She had not called it. She had told herself, in November and in December and in January and through the spring, that she was not going to call it, that Devon was right, that the real letting go was the one that did not come with conditions. She had mostly believed herself. She looked at Rosie Tran's face on the sidewalk, the expression that had been there for just a moment before they walked away, and she recognized it as the expression of a person who has received something they had stopped expecting to receive and is still adjusting to the fact of its presence. She sat with the contact on her screen. She thought about the letter she had sent. She thought about the conversation with Devon. She thought about 8 months of driving past Osteria Settimo and not stopping, which she had been counting as a form of progress, and which today, watching this, felt like a different kind of failure. She thought about what it would cost her to make the call. She thought about what it would cost her not to. Her thumb moved to the screen. She pressed the contact. It rang twice. Then a voice. Male. Careful. I was wondering when you'd call. Cara looked at the registry office door. I need you to find out everything about the wedding, she said. Date. Venue. Guest list. Everything. A pause. The street was quiet around her, and I need you to be discreet. This time, I need it done correctly. The call lasted 4 minutes. When it ended, she set the phone on the passenger seat and looked at the registry office for a moment longer, and then she started the car, and she drove away. And the street returned to its ordinary Friday morning indifference, and somewhere in River North a restaurant was preparing for lunch service. And 2 people who did not know they were being watched were standing in a kitchen that smelled of morning stock and mise en place, and the call had been made. This time, It had been made.